reporting schedule. And those deal with both the secure trash zones and regular trash handling.
Sorry, I have a question for you really quick. Mr.
Yes.
Weddleton.
Page 8E says closed and secure trash containers shall be placed for pickup the morning of collection and retrieved no later than 9 p.m. the same day. As we go forward, if you have a bear cart, you can have it the evening before, so that's inconsistent.
Through the chair, that's actually not inconsistent because the secure trash zones is a separate code section, and it actually deals with both kinds of containers in that section as well.
Ms. Alto.
Thank you. Back to section 2, sorry to make you jump.
Okay.
Mr. Weddleton had previously suggested the idea of kind of a fix-it if you had a trash violation, and that you'd be able to kind of do a fix-it ticket by getting a bear-proof trash can. Did you guys consider that?
That's on the top of page 6. It's for the secure trash violations. In other words, it's the bear country violations, not the generic everywhere violations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are we just going for it, or?
Do you have a question pertinent to the sections that's been covered?
I mean, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question as to why we would require people to put their cans out the night before, or I mean, not allow it the night before until the morning of, which presumably is 12:01.
So through the chair, currently, one of the biggest challenges with trash as an attractant to bears is the duration of that attractant being outside.
I didn't actually finish my question because I was hoping you would say 12:01, yes or no.
Oh, okay.
Is that 12:01? Is that when the morning of, or what does that mean?
I think that's up to the individual.
Okay, well that sounds problematic. But okay, so along those lines, so I live in an area where I've never seen a bear get into trash. I don't think it's reasonable to ask every single person to either be up at midnight or up at 5 or 6 a.m. to put out their trash can when we don't have a lot of bear. We don't have any bear incidences, at least where I live. So why wouldn't we use that zone to also determine where those cans? I totally understand if there are bear trash incidences, we shouldn't put them out the night before. But in areas where that's not an issue, why would we require that?
Through the chair, so any trash that's putrescible, I'm going to murder that word, but basically any trash that has the kinds of stuff in it that bears can sniff out and think will be tasty is considered a nuisance no matter where you're located. And just because you have not experienced bears yet does not mean that you won't. And the primary motivation for requiring folks to put stuff out in the morning of pickup or on the morning of pickup is that originally it was proposed for a time specific. And there were a lot more challenges we felt with a time specific given people's different schedules, et cetera. So we thought we could loosen it by just saying the morning of. Yes, that still requires you to put it out either at 12:01 when you go to bed the night before or at 5:01 when you get up the next morning. But minimizing the amount of time that we're leaving our bear attractants out is really the key of this.
Okay.
Thank you. So that rounds out section 2, which is the fine section, and then the last sort of quick section is section 4, which is only one sentence long. This is the effective date of the ordinance. As I mentioned in the introduction, the S version proposes removing entirely the March 1st, 2020 secure trash regulation zone implementation date and makes it available upon passage of this ordinance. The reason for that being that we have changed the ways in which the secure trash regulation zones are designated so that not only can we allow this to go into effect immediately and use secure trash zones, but the municipal manager and the assembly now will have the flexibility to determine whether or not it's practical to declare an area to be a secure trash regulation zone, i.e. the haulers that service that area, for example, don't have bear cans available at that time. We've created a system that allows us to start with our guinea pig community, if you will, which is Girdwood. Get Girdwood designated right out of the gate, which they have been very strong advocates of, and then allows the assembly and the manager the flexibility in the future to work on other areas and take into account more than just the biological needs, but also the actual practical impact of doing that. And so that's section 4. Moving on to the tastiest trash of this ordinance,
Actually,
section 1.
Ms. Kennedy?
Oh, thank you. In terms of going through the process of defining these zones, is that going to be a public process, or is that just going to be administratively determined?
I am on that subject right now.
Okay, perfect.
Section 1, which is I think the most significant portion of this ordinance, and introduces the new concepts of new municipal code sections. This starts at the bottom of your page 1 and continues on for many other pages. Excuse me. This is a general overview of how that new code section is laid out. It adds municipal code, Title 15, a new chapter 100, new section 100. And the general purpose of this, sort of to answer Assembly Member Quinn Davidson's question again, is that this is designed to create consistent rules that address trash handling throughout the municipality, but also will add the ability for us to recognize our adjacency to Bear Country and create rules to help minimize those potential conflicts. Section 020 starts at the top of page 2. This is really the sort of boilerplate language where the Assembly by code is empowering the municipal manager to authorize rules and regulations as it relates to secure trash. And then section 030, also starting on page 2, this is an important section where we begin to introduce actual definitions of a lot of the key terms that we use throughout the ordinance and that we use throughout discussing this issue. I wanted to highlight a couple of those just real quick. Bear-resistant container, which is a new definition in code. This is a container that meets requirements, certified by the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, the IGBC, or is deemed as an equivalent or greater by the waste management providers. In other words, if a particular waste management provider doesn't have IGBC certified, but they have bear-resistant canisters that they have certified as being bear-resistant, then we will allow those. In the S version, the original version, we included bear-resistant dumpsters, but you'll see in the S version we removed that. We removed that for 2 reasons. One, through our conversations with the waste haulers, it was determined that that's a very complex and hard bear resistance to achieve. I believe what they told us is that dumpsters are not IGBC certified, and that typically dumpsters have to be the lids to make them bear resistant have to be manufactured one on per lid, one off case by the actual waste haulers themselves. And so as they're creating these, it's costly, it's time intensive, and they have to manufacture those. So we decided to pull that off, and then bear resistant container we think is broad enough that it can still cover more than just trash cans if needed. The other thing that is important, we begin to define the types of trash, I guess you could say, that we put inside of our trash cans. And so the 2 key definitions to know are rubbish, which is, in essence, things that won't attract bears, yard waste, wood, grass clippings, things like that. And then there's trash, and trash includes everything that probably has a scent and might be appealing. And also includes some of the other things that we mentioned in rubbish. One other new addition to the S version over the original version is the addition of what we're terming a temporary construction dumpster, most commonly referred to as a rollaway. Rollaways are the kind of trash containers that come in large sizes that are usually rented or leased in a short period or short duration by residents and also by commercial vendors. They use these over a short period of time for, say, a home remodeling project, a cleaning out my yard project, things of that nature, where the actual trash container or rollaway is only there for a temporary amount of time, and the type of stuff that's going into it, at least as we define it in here, are things that do not attract bears. So we don't want to unfairly inhibit people who utilize the rollaways for those kinds of activities. And as we get to in a later section, we also don't want the rollaways themselves to become attractive. So at a later section in the ordinance, we'll get to this, but there is a prohibition against throwing things that are not rubbish, not these non-bear attracting trashes, into a rollaway. So those are some of the key new definitions. Moving on to the next section, which is 040. This is the introduction of what we call trash handling standards. Again, right at the top of page 3, one of the changes between the original draft of the ordinance and the S version of this draft is that we plugged in the rollaways or the temporary dumpsters so that it's clear that they do not have to have the watertight sealed lids, which is practically impossible for a rollaway to do. So we wanted to make sure it's clear that those do not have to comply with that. We talk about a lot of the other items under 040, B, C, et cetera. Those are similar to that existing code, so I won't spend a lot of time on those. D is the introduction of a new provision, and this is where we begin to differentiate between bear containers, locked bear resistant containers, and regular containers. D is where we introduce the idea that if you have a locked bear resistant container, you can put it out the night before. This speaks to your question, and Assemblymember Quinn Davidson. But all other trash, we're requiring you to put it out the morning of collection. You asked the question, does that mean 1201? I think we would say yes, but it's really up to the individual. Again, like we did in Section A, Section E, and Section F, both do not apply to the rollaway temporary dumpsters. Section F is, again, this is a reflection of current code, but when your trash cans aren't out, they're required to be adjacent to your house, your property, your apartment, in a garage, just not out on the street. And then G is just, you can't put stuff out if it's not secure. Moving on, the following section, 050, is just where we talk about violations and what those who those violators could be. Section 060 is where we spell out the penalties. In essence, we're going to fine you, and it's important to note Section B of 060, these are fines per day per violation. So if you, for example, left your trash out after it had been picked, or left your trash canister out after it had been picked up for 3 days, it is possible that you could be cited for 2 days worth of violations, since you're required to bring your cans back no later than 9 p.m. the day of pickup. So that's important to note, and that is actually conforms with current practice. Moving on to Section 070.
Actually, before we get to that meaty section, Ms. LaFrance, I hope you have a pun for us for IGBCs.
I hope I have what?
I hope you have a pun.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to disappoint. I have no pun. I just had never heard of the IGBC actually before. But my question, Mr. Tweedy, we've heard from folks about concerns about the large size carts, and I know you've heard that as well, and the difficulty of elderly and disabled folks maneuvering them. Is there anything in here that will require smaller carts to be available? Okay.
You guys are too good today. You're like asking questions I'm about to get to. Yes,
Oh, okay.
I'm about to address that.
Okay, and then the second point, Mr. Chair, is we also, as you know, have had feedback from people about waste removal utilities picking up within the scheduled time frame, and sometimes it doesn't match up. So there was a request to include violations aimed at waste removal utilities that don't pick up during the stated time frame. I'm just putting that out there at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. France.
Okay, carrying on to get to those questions. The Secure Trash Regulation Zone section, this is the new section. In the S version, what you see here is we've created a methodology that we think can accommodate the flexibility that will be needed to roll this out. In essence, the municipal manager makes a recommendation to the assembly that an area or neighborhood or specific location be designated as a secure trash regulation zone. The municipal manager will make that determination based on wildlife, reported wildlife and trash, fish and game advice, et cetera, biological data first and foremost, and then secondly has to make that determination, as does the assembly, that designating that area is actually in the best interest of the municipality. What that key phrase means is that if there's an area that is identified as being qualifying for secure trash designation, but the carriers don't have the capacity to provide service to that area, i.e. they don't have enough bear-resistant containers in stock, it'll take them 6 months to order, et cetera, that gives the municipality the flexibility to not require them immediately, but to actually allow the carriers to ramp up their capacity to deliver that service before the area becomes an active secure trash zone.
Mr. Wells.
So when it says assembly designates, is that by resolution or ordinance?
Through the chair, we specifically left that vague so that you could decide, but we recommend the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Ms. Kennedy.
Okay, and in process, a question on process then. So does this start at the community council level as well? And when they get information or they get notified that this particular area within their council is going to be or has been identified by Fish and Game or whoever else. So, yeah, is that kind of where you think the starting point is, or this just starts from the municipal managers?
Yeah. So through the chair, it actually goes to you guys. So the designation from the municipal manager comes in the form of a recommendation to the assembly. And then the assembly will have a resolution on its agenda saying, yes, we agree, and Turnagain should be designated as a secure trash regulation or regulation zone. As far as public notice to the community councils, they get the same same public notice for all assembly meetings. They will get the same public notice as they get for all assembly matters. But as far as calling, or emailing the Turnagain Community Council to say, hey, this is about to happen to you. We didn't put that in code. I think in practice it would happen that way, but we didn't find an easy way to codify that. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
but yes, okay, so, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Sure, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to the point on recommending by resolution to designate an area a secure trash zone, would we also undesignate areas? I know this came up in a previous conversation.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. We also have not figured out how to solve that problem yet, but because the act of creating the secure trash regulation zone falls to the assembly by resolution, we would recommend, then you can also by resolution undesignate.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Gates.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple questions about the designation process. I first want to say I think that in general the legislative powers the assembly has could, of course, designate something which it doesn't before. I don't think there's any restriction on using legislative powers that way. I also see that this says the municipal manager may recommend, but I think that the general legislative powers you have, the assembly could designate an area without recommendation of the municipal manager. Probably do that independently when it's brought to you by someone else or an assembly member. I don't think that that's intended to be descriptive to only acting on recommendations from the municipal manager.
Through the chair, I don't think that we specifically talked about the idea of the assembly designating an area without municipal manager concurrence. I think that would be unusual, but certainly if that's the way that the body wanted it to go, we could certainly go that way. I do think that a designation or a decision like this probably should come from an administrative staff person or the administration to the assembly in order to, number one, help alert those that will be involved in the enforcement of it eventually, but also in the administration of it so that they're aware. And then number two, it seems like a heavy lift to add to the list of responsibilities of an assembly member, pay attention to fish and game postings and know when to designate areas. So I think that the process as laid out is probably the most efficient way to do it, but to sort of answer Dean's concerns about separation of powers and what the assembly can and can't do, I don't think there's anything that says you can't just start designating them yourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Gates.
A couple more.
Sure.
I agree what you said was probably most efficient, but just want to recognize the separation of powers concept. My other question though is with designating how, and you got it there, you can recognize that, but have you envisioned each household is going to be affected in its own, going to be notified of the change, and everyone talked about rules to community resource, but there's specific rules to each household that's within its own, and is that a process that we need to figure out later, or how do you envision that working?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. Good question, and not an easy one to answer. So in discussions about how best to do that, it was recognized very early on that the municipality is ill-equipped to provide that notice to specific customers because there will be multiple customers of multiple carriers in a certain area, and there's no way for us to know this person's an Alaska Waste customer and this person's a different carrier customer. So ultimately, we think if the designation is going to occur, it will occur with the carriers that service the area that's designated, and we'll rely on the carriers to help provide that message to their customers, since they're the ones that are paying for the service in the area anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. So I have Ms. Quinn Davidson, Ms. Kennedy, and then Ms. Zalato.
Chris, you might be getting to this, so feel free to tell me to wait. But I'm just wondering about the cost of the containers, and I mean, I've had several constituents ask me about why don't we make rates higher, and then that cost pays for where people need these containers, they can get them, but they're not paying more. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm actually going to steer clear of that. I think at the end of the presentation, we have many of the carriers in the room, and they'll have better and different answers on that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Good question, though.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
No, thank you. Then I'll save one of my questions for what you just said there. But isn't there, I didn't see anything in this that really talks about kind of the season by which this is an issue. So was there any conversation about saying this only applies between November to March or April or some such thing when we know bears shouldn't be hanging around?
Good question, and another one that I'm going to punt to our carrier friends because they've asked those questions as well. And then, Jack, did you want to come up or? So I saw you raise your hand. I wasn't sure what you were doing. But in short, we haven't solved that, but that's a very good point.
Through the chair, so it's not just bears, it's ravens, it's seagulls, it's moose, etc. So we cover one of the encompassing area with that.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. We, in conversations with the haulers, we have talked about all of the animals that are attracted to trash, and bears being the biggest concern. They do have a seasonality. So in the other 6 months of the year, what do you do? I think there's concern on the hauler's part, and I'm just going to paraphrase what I think they'll say later, which is we ramp up and somebody has a can for 6 months, and then they say we don't want it for the other 6 months. That's a tough one, and I think that's probably better solved by the individual carriers themselves on how to address. But to speak to Jack's point, you know, the attraction of trash and animals doesn't go away. It's just that the biggest and scariest of them goes away over the winter.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zalato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some concerns about due process on notice to individuals who are now in, a secure trash regulation zone. I feel like the municipality has an obligation to figure out some way to mail notice. So like, hey, get in touch with your carrier, which, they know who their trash bill is. Because if they're then fined, they can say, oh, well, I got notice from my carrier that they don't have the cans or whatever. But I feel like we've got to do something about notice. I don't know if there's some opportunity there for an A3 or something, just where we mail notice after designation. We mail notice for things where you may be subject to, water line hookup or other things. It will be maybe harder with property owners versus renters, but I get the logistical issues, but I'm really worried about people not getting notice.
So through the chair, that's a great concern and one that we share as well. Because of the disconnect between property ownership, tenancy, and whether or not they are a customer of a given trash provider, we really are ill-equipped to provide any kind of notice and expect it to be efficient or effective. Now, that being said, one of the concerns that you raise is if somebody starts getting fines because they didn't know that it was going to be designated and they continue to put out their old can. I'm hopeful that that won't be the case because both we have the flexibility in making the secure trash areas active once we know the haulers can provide that service to the customers in that area. That's the flexibility I talked about earlier, number one. And then number two, I think if the haulers themselves know that they're in a secure trash regulation area, and they're going to be the ones that want to make sure their customers are aware that you now have to swap out your can for a different one that meets this criteria, this requirement. I personally think they're in the best position to be the ones that do that. The other thing that we have to remember is that all of this goes through public process anyway. So this is an active legislation, active legislative action that you guys take. There will be public notice. There will even be public testimony on the designation at the Assembly Chambers. So there is public awareness of it, but as far as the municipality being able to actually inform people, it just seems like it's something we can't really do well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, this would maybe be for the providers, but in the era of paperless billing, and direct debit, I don't see my trash bill. So what kind of strategies are we talking about for noticing to folks about the need to get berry-resistant cans when a lot of folks just pay their bill and it's automatic and they're really divorced from that process?
We could do email. We could do letters. Can we do phone calls?
Yeah, so we currently do inform our customers. A lot of customers do still receive a bill, so we print things on their bill. We have a number of our customers, we have their email address, so we can do email blasts. We also have the ability to do kind of like robo calls, where basically it's a pre-recorded message that gets sent out to the household.
I do think having the muni have some part of it would be helpful, because the more times we can tell people, I think the better that's going to be. And say like a landlord lives out of state, maybe they get the email, but their tenants don't communicate with them. Maybe the tenant gets something from the muni in the mail or on their door. I think more education is better.
Is it possible to slap a sticker on the cans if you're rolling them in and out? I know that's an extra step, but that would be. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be. Again, when you think about the number of customers we're talking about.
Well, because it's only be a zone at a time.
Correct, but even within a zone, it would be thousands of customers. So for a driver, for us to be responsible to put a sticker on to inform every person within that zone via a sticker, a door hang, or something like that. Number one, very costly, be very time consuming.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add to that real quick? Sure. So in addition to communication from whichever hauler or waste provider is in a given area, one thing that we could consider is similar to the way that applicants for, say, a marijuana license and others are required to have 21 days public notice published in some newspaper, that we could do things like that. I don't think that's very effective myself, but there are ways that we could try and do some sort of blanket awareness about these. I'll also add that I suspect that these are going to be very newsworthy topics as they move forward, and that there will likely be media coverage of these secure trash areas as they come online. So let's not forget that too.
Thank you. So I have Mr. Peterson, then Mr. Webbington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I pay my bill electronically, but I get a quarterly statement from Alaska Waste that shows how much was charged each month and that type of thing. So, I don't know how effective it would be to notify people 3 months in advance. They might forget, but that would be at least one way to reach some people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Webbington.
So I'd add, if someone gets fined for not having a bear card in a secure zone, their penalty is either pay the fine or get a bear card.
True.
So it's not, if they don't have a bear card, they cure it by getting one, and there's no fine.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you. I lost track where I was. Oh, okay. Also in the secure trash areas, I'm on section B now, middle of page 4. We talk about all the requirement that all containers in an STRZ need to be the bear-resistant containers. The new section that's underlined is we exempted the temporary construction dumpsters, or rollaways as they're colloquially referred to. Section B2, this is an important one for many of a couple of the sponsors. All trash collection providers shall offer bear-resistant containers in multiple sizes. And when we get to talk to some of the providers, you'll hear more about this. This is both an important one for customers, but also a very challenging one for the providers. And they'll talk more specifically about that. Primarily, it's around the fact that there aren't many manufacturers of IGBC containers in different sizes to begin with, number one. Number two, it's a logistical challenge to be a trash provider and keep in stock, on hand, a bunch of surplus canisters in a bunch of different sizes. So we're cognizant of that, but we do think that this is an important provision for customers across the bowl for a couple of reasons. One, not everyone uses the 96-gallon waste container, which is the typical size right now of an IGBC bear-resistant container. It probably would take me 2.5 months to fill one of those up myself. So that's one thing. The other thing is price, and we're very sensitive to the fact that bear-resistant containers do add costs for the customers. So if a customer is faced with an increased waste disposal bill, but they're able to minimize that cost by selecting a slightly smaller size, we think that that's beneficial for the customers. B3. I apologize that the wording of this is a little wonky, but really the takeaway from this is we're really trying to identify the fact that anybody who's a resident or manager or an owner of a structure where people live and they get trash, they have to follow the rules. They have to provide the bear-resistant containers. They have to keep them inside or against the house when they're not in use, et cetera, et cetera. Number B4, no person shall place in the right-of-way or yard setback any bear container that's not securely closed. This speaks specifically to the fact that bear-resistant containers don't work unless you use them right, i.e. close the lid and lock it. And you'll hear from the haulers, there's different mechanisms out there for providing this kind of locking lid, some of which are more efficient than others. But that's certainly the easiest way to make these bear-resistant canisters successful, is that you don't have a lid that the bear can just flip open and eat. Number 5, we've added, this is specific to the rollaways. Again, we call them temporary construction dumpsters. This is the section where we say if you have a temporary construction dumpster, you can use it for all the stuff that doesn't attract bears, but you cannot put stuff in it that will. And that came out of a discussion that we had with many of the haulers a couple weeks ago. Moving on to page 5. This, again, the wording's a little bit wonky, but basically we're trying to state if you've got a bear-resistant container that gets damaged in any way, it is your responsibility to have that canister or repaired or replaced outright. And that failure to do so can be a fine. And this speaks to the idea of secure trash, a secure locked lid on a bear-resistant trash container is the only way to keep that from being an attractant. So if it becomes damaged in any way, it's no longer effective, and so you need to have it replaced. And that brings us roughly through the section 1. I answered a lot of questions along the way, but now that we're through the bulk of the ordinance, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Sure, we'll go through questions for Mr. Schutte, and then we'll turn it over to the utilities for their comments and questions. Ms. Altel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you just walk through kind of like, we're going, so what areas designated by the assembly? So some kind of notice goes out, like what's like a rough timeline? You know, we're obviously saying that this is a high, I mean, we know some areas are high traffic, but we see one that becomes high traffic. Like what are we looking at in terms of timeline?
Yeah, and I'm going to highlight what I refer to as our guinea pig community, which is at a slight advantage because we've been talking about this specifically with that community for a while now, so they're a little bit more ahead of the curve in that regard. Plus, they're already a community that's so involved in bear issues that it's a community that I think by some accounts is like 90% bear resistant already. But obviously the first act is to designate or recommend designation, It goes through the assembly, which is then 2-week, 4-week process with you guys, and then once it's approved and we have set the effective date, which I think is an important component of a resolution that you guys do, is setting the start date. The next step is to work with all of the waste haulers that provide service for that area so that they're aware of the date, start point. We probably should do that in the beginning as well, just to make sure that the start date that's being identified is not unrealistic. And then they, similar to our conversation we just had, we would hope that they can help notify all of their customers that this change is coming and prices are changing, or we're going to swap the can out, whatever the messaging is. And then they start providing service to those bear-resistant containers. Beginning to end, I think with Girdwood, we could say it's probably a 6-week process, to be fair, with notice and other timelines.
I would just maybe have a thought up then about when the municipal manager designee makes the recommendation, it says designate area, neighborhood, or specific location. It could say and potential, and start date. That would be in that recommendation, because I would presume that when the municipal manager is making that recommendation, they'll want to talk to the haulers.
Through the chair, yeah, we could certainly add that to this if you need. I think that as a practical matter, it would be top of mind for the municipal manager before we make a recommendation to you to understand whether or not it's practical to do right away, or what the delay would need to be. That speaks specifically to the second bullet point, A2, where we have to determine it's in the best interest of the municipality. It's not in our interest if we're going to declare it and then nobody can provide it.
I have one more. Thank you. Could it be would there be potentially a designation that an administration would like to see us, roll it out as fast as possible, knowing that it's going to kind of potentially wave through as cans become available? Like, let's say the hauler has, 90 cans and we're talking about 200 homes. Or we it's all or nothing?
Through the chair, that's a good question. I think for it to be most effective, it has to be all or nothing. Nothing's not the right word. Start when all are able to start in order to be most effective, for 2 reasons. One, then it gets really complicated when it comes to enforcement. And number 2, the bears just move on to the other cans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alto. Any further questions for Mr. Schutte? Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Any comments from utilities? Yes.
So regarding the roll-away containers or
Yeah, and ma'am, if you could actually come up and reintroduce yourself for the record, please.
Me?
Yes.
Sarah Jost, Northern Waste. Regarding the roll-away containers, or as we call them, roll-offs, with the exception of one hauler, we all have containers that have trash in them instead of just rubbish. So we have some of those that are in regular service with customers whose capacity needs are as such as those large containers. So how will that affect those customers?
Through the chair, if I may, and this is a good question. So customers that consistently have a large dumpster or a large roll-off like that, that's not what is envisioned in the temporary construction dumpster definition that we have here. Temporary construction dumpster, I can read it, is rented or leased for less than 90 days for temporary use.
Okay, so when you see it on site is what I was going to say. It could be a permanent one and not a temporary.
Correct. Now, if it's a permanent dumpster, though, it does have to provide some kind of lid, et cetera, to keep bears out.
Yep.
Which, in talking to you guys, it sounds like you make your own. And okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure there was clarity there. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Kurt Brown, Alaska Waste. So I know that there's Girdwood primarily now does have a majority of bear trains. If the assembly designates Girdwood as a secure trash regulation zone, there are some concerns that come with that. One of them being, first of all, we do not have multiple size containers that is specified in this ordinance. So that would be something that could be problematic. Along with that, there are some RCA concerns, that regulatory commission concerns we would have to address as well.
Hi, Mark Kingrich with Alaska Waste. So I know everyone understands that kind of involved in this whole process is the RCA as far as the residential waste, solid waste rates and Anchorage are regulated by the RCA. So we charge a cost of service to the customer based on our costs. So that is one of the reasons why the Bear cart service is more expensive than the standard service, because the cost of that cart is attached to that rate. But also another consideration that we're understanding is that from my understanding, we can't just go and take a customer and force them to charge to a higher rate of service, right? So what we would look to do is if Girdwood, for instance, was designated a secure trash zone, we would then adjust our tariff to say that this geographic area of Girdwood is a secure trash zone, and then the service offerings, instead of offering the full menu of waste services, we would narrow to just multiple size bear carts, and then that would allow us to transition those folks to those, to pen them into just one of those two services. So my point is I appreciate that the Assembly recognizes that there'll be an interactive process with the hauler in this process, and that'll be one of the considerations. Is there will be a little time needed for us to define these secure bear trash zones in our RCA tariff, so that the menu of trash services in those zones are limited to just bear services, which then allows us to funnel the customers to just those services. Because as it stands, they would technically are allowed to choose a full menu of services.
And I actually have a question for you, Mr. Weddleton.
How long will it take you to do that?
So filings. So it should be a 30 to 90 day process. However, because residential rates are utility regulated, just as power may be, there can sometimes be challenges. But we welcome sitting down with the municipality, with the RCA to help talk through some of these things ahead of time. So because we want to be supportive of a good process, and I'm sure if we all sat down together that something could be determined.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any other utilities that want to comment on this?
I'm into the geeky technical thing right now, so bear with me in terms of the definitions. So my understanding of the intent of this is that it's for putrescible solid waste carts. So that if someone has curbside residential recycling, that the bear-resistant container would not be required for that. So again, I'm not an attorney, so in the definitions I had a little concern because the secure trash zone says all trash containers must be bear-resistant. And then when you look at your definition, when you look at our definitions list at the beginning, trash containers are defined as having trash in them. The definition of trash includes rubbish. And then when you get to your rubbish definition, it includes recyclables. So while, common sense, I think we all intend to just have solid waste carts, not recycling carts, someone from the outside could do that little tracing and, say that recycling carts need to be included. So, perhaps some just clear bullet point that, again, I'll leave that to the experts to figure their way out of that one, but that was something we noticed.
Sure, Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Would you mind speaking to, I know you just started the process there, RTA, but would you mind speaking to how that cost is distributed, if it's just individuals getting the card, or if there's a way to distribute that?
Sure. So currently, the way the system works is it's a fairly pure cost of service system. So our actual cost for providing these services at your home for that small can, that is basically dollar for dollar with some small operating margin what that cost is. And then the larger can is passed through. So some communities, for instance, to motivate waste reduction, choose to subsidize rates. So they maybe add a little bit to the bigger cans to the cost to encourage people to get the smaller cans to recycle. So in the current structure, the way we file our rates,
by the way?
no. So because our current working with the RCA is that the 95-gallon bear cart, you've got the cost of all the garbage in there and the cost of the cart. So that's going to be up here. And the regular 95-gallon garbage cans is going to be less because you still have all that weight, but the cart cost is less. Now, if the municipality, I understand there's been conversation about trying to blunt that impact. That would require us, again, sitting down with regulators to see if there's a way to, instead of charging straight across for the 35, straight across for the 60, straight across for the 90, to do some type of blending. Again, that would be something we're not opposed to sitting down and having that discussion, but the way the formulas require us to do it now, we have no choice but to charge that rate for the bear cart, because that cart costs 4 to 5 times the regular standard garbage can.
You have to remove RCA's.
Correct, yep. But we would hopefully work, if we work with you and the municipality, that would make having a conversation with them most likely easier.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Any other comments from, yes?
I have another concern. In section, I guess it's section 2, number 6, talks about any cart that gets damaged, there's 72 hours to repair or replace it. This is something that is, for us as a large provider, is going to be quite problematic. So basically, if somebody's cart gets, if we collect, some dumpster-based trash on Friday, we have until Monday to get that cart fixed. So it's not business days, it's 72 hours. So we would have to have crews working pretty much 7 days a week to repair and replace bear carts. From the Klutna to, or however far, the fences, the entire surface area, which would be quite costly. Again, if as we think about costs are being passed on to our customers, that would be something that we, again, rolled into part of the rates. And so we would, currently our process is we go to certain areas of town on certain days. And we would like to see if it's possible to change this to be, give us those 5 working days to be able to, on our normal schedule, be able to go out and repair, replace carts as they get damaged. What we do now is if somebody gets a damaged bear cart, we tell them we're going to come change it out for you, and until that day, keep your trash secured in your garage or some other fashion until you get another cart. And so we would like to propose or ask that might be a consideration.
Can I follow up real quick? So would you say shall be replaced by the next regularly scheduled pickup? Is that how you guys think?
Or on the next scheduling. Yeah, then by the next scheduled service day.
Okay, that we can do. Thanks. Thank you.
Ms. Davidson?
Unless anybody else, I don't want to someone else. Crystal, would you like to
Just put me on your sheet.
Sure.
Go ahead. Okay. In terms of operationally costs for pickup, I have a bear-proof trash can out in Eagle River, and I know that the truck is not geared to actually very easily dumping those trash cans into the big truck. The driver either has to open the door and reach out and unlock it and prop it enough that it stays open, and then comes alongside, grabs it with the arms that dump it in there. So have you crunched any numbers in terms of how much longer that leaves your trucks on the road, so to speak, and how much more manpower hours you have to handle that?
So yes, we have, and that's rolled into the rates now. However, what I will say is we're phasing out those containers. We are now phasing in the containers that do have gravity locks in them, so that our driver doesn't have to get out and undo the lids. So we have, so the cars we're currently providing don't require a driver to get out. In most cases, nothing's perfect, but in most cases they operate on a gravity lock system.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know it's in here, but I'm just sort of absorbing this as you've given it to us. Can you talk, Chris, about if you're in an apartment complex, will there be, I know you have to keep contained, but are there larger dumpsters that usually apartment complexes get? And if so, are they special bear ones? And I apologize.
Yeah, through the chair, multifamily tenants typically don't have individual trash service. It's part of a facility service, so a dumpster. Similar to the line of questioning we just had, the manufacturers have to fabricate the lids for the dumpsters in order to make those secure. But that's what's envisioned, is that they and I think many of them have those already, whether plastic or metal. They do have the lids that close already. So that's what's envisioned for a dumpster that services a multifamily residential unit.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you may have said this and I missed it, but so what happens if a commercial business operation falls in one of these designated districts and they need a dumpster or whatever? Are they going to be required to get that?
So through the chair, similar to the multifamily situation, commercial tenants have typically have larger trash service, whether it's a dumpster or a roll-off, as we described earlier. And those currently many of them already have a lid of some kind on them. And what this would require is in a secure trash regulation area that they all do. And there are certainly challenges with that. You heard that from some of the haulers today. They have to fabricate those per dumpster or per rollaway. So there are some challenges with it, but it is doable.
And just to step and think of another one, I used to have a lease in a mini mall, and they had a dumpster, and to keep people from the neighborhood from dumping their garbage in there, they locked the dumpster, and so that creates a problem, makes it more difficult for the haulers to empty those as well. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, those all have gravity locks.
Well, those are gravity locks too? How the heck does a gravity lock keep a bear out? I don't understand.
So the gravity lock, it keeps the trash container securely locked. Inside there's a mechanism that has a tumbler in there. It's not a gyroscope type thing. So if it gets knocked over, it doesn't undo. But if it follows the specific motion of our truck, there's a ball bearing that rolls in there that allows it to open the dumpster.
It should all be locked and closed.
Which is why, again, we talk about the cost of the containers. They are quite expensive because it's actually the gravity locking bear carts are relatively new technology. But that's why we currently have only the one size. We're working with manufacturers developing those sides, but it's an evolving technology.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. So if somebody accidentally ends up in a trash can they get out? I'm thinking about kids. So
that's a great question. I mean, there's from the inside there's a mechanism that we can pull and open. I know that we can manually operate it. I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
That's a great question.
I'm wondering if that would be worth pursuing.
I've been in the business for 25 years and never been asked that question.
How would they get in there? Big brothers.
Big brother.
Yeah. But if it's locked,
Been there, done that. Curiosity. Yeah, you don't want to know.
if it's locked, then I guess you have to be a really skinny kid.
Hey, I know lots of dumpster divers.
When they're locked, though, I do too.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Medina.
I just wanted to note for the record that my wife is on the Watershed and Natural Resources Advisory Commission and actually signed this resolution. So I don't think I'll talk about that at the regular meeting, but I just wanted to state that.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Whittleton, then Mr. Schutte.
So this is something that we'd like to get going soon. Not necessarily the secure zones, but the fines that'll help check code enforcement, do their job. But also Girdwood's anxious to go. But this is the last item on our agenda. So should we go late, our next meeting is 3 weeks later. So I would like to see this moved early. I don't think we'll have a lot of testimony. I think tonight's been pretty supportive, but there may be some amendments. But if this gets pushed off, we're way into the season. Sooner the better. It would have been nice to have this in February. I take the blame for that.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Mr. Schutte.
Yeah, thank you. And to both of your points, I'm glad I almost forgot to mention it. There is the resolution that came from the Watershed and Natural Resources Commission yesterday or the day before, I forget when they met, specific to this ordinance and some recommended language changes. By and far, the recommendations that they made really can sort of be incorporated already through interpretation of the code. One of the biggest changes that they recommended is the inclusion of animal food storage as being one of the prohibited activities, outdoor food storage, which I guess many of us who don't have kennels or goats or anything thought about in the original drafting, but we do think that there are some good recommendations in here, but as Assemblymember Weddleton pointed out, we are anxious to get Girdwood under STRZ, so we can always come back later to add the recommended language changes that they have made. As I mentioned, they don't really affect the effectiveness of the ordinance as currently drafted.
Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Mr. Whittleton.
Okay, and just to add, we're dealing with just a small piece of the problem with this. You also have I mean, the birds eat the dog food, but also have chickens and other little critters that bears like to eat. So I think this is like step one. There is a next step, which could be started soon, to say what are going to be the rules. Do you need electric fence or whatever? I don't know what it would be. I'm not that familiar with it, but I know it's been a problem for code enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick incident. I was taking my trash out to the curb one winter here a couple of years ago, and I noticed that my neighbor across the street, there were about 4 ravens that were hanging around his garbage can, and one of them sort of jumped and flew and got his nose underneath the lid and flipped the lid open on the garbage can, and then they all got in there and drug stuff out of it. I wish I'd had a video of it, because I could hardly believe it. Actually, those birds are pretty sharp, actually. Thank you.
Yes, they are. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. All right, I'll go ahead and very quick comment, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tracy Christopherson. I'm the board president for the Valley View neighborhood in Hillside, and I just wanted to offer the suggestion. I don't know if this information is readily available, but were you to get this stuff out to the homeowners associations, we have contact of all the members within our neighborhood, and we can get this in our mailers, get it on our websites. So that was one suggestion for outsourcing this information. Second to that, I wanted to follow up with what Mr. Weddleton said, and that's that bears are very much a daily occurrence in our neighborhood, and bears and trash and kids. We're living with it day to day. So sooner than later would be great. I appreciate all your efforts in bringing this forward. One clarification I'd like to have is on page 3, section 40, trash handling standards. Since we're not in a trash secure zone here, when you're talking about handling the trash, at letter F, it just says that these containers have to be stored within 5 feet of the principal structure. Is that a container that can have smelly refuse in it, just outside of your house? Because that kind of seems to defeat the purpose.
Through the chair, yeah, section F, which is trash handling standards for both inside and outside of an SDRZ. We're just trying to say when your cans aren't out on the curb or wherever, end of the driveway for service, they need to be stored either next to your house or inside the garage. We're not specifically addressing if you have stuff in it or not. We're just saying if it's not out for service, then it needs to be inside or next to your house.
Well, I guess people could argue, whether I carry my bin, 5 feet away down my driveway, or I leave it 5 feet from my house, if it's filled with smelly trash and it's not in a bear-resistant canister, I don't think we're getting the results that we want. So that's something I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to call this work session closed, and we'll get ready for the next one. Thank you.